everyone. Welcome to the Exec Vision Manager Coaching Academy. This is part of a bigger program that we do with our clients on site. Usually takes 6 or 8 hours, workshop style. And I'll give you a little look inside of what we're doing and how we're helping people think about creating consistency and building a sales coaching culture at scale. If you really think about the mandates that all of us face, we have to grow pipeline. We have to grow revenue. I mean, that's what we do in sales. But when you break that down and say, how are you going to do that? How are you going to go about doing that? And I've interviewed over 200 sales leaders on their biggest challenges for growing pipeline and revenue. I kept hearing the same word come up over and over again. And that word is consistency followed by accountability. So consistency and accountability at scale. And in my dealings with the American Association of Inside Sales Professionals, the AISP, I've been to many workshops. And when you get to that root cause of what are the things that we need to address as an organization, that root cause analysis in a workshop, frequently people will say things like, if we just had a sales coaching culture, everything would be easier. Culture is what people are doing when no one's looking. So how do we create that sales coaching culture? The reality is most managers don't have a coaching plan. They're not prepared for coaching opportunities. And I think most importantly, they don't have any way to observe coachable moments. So if you can't see the person you're trying to help, how are you going to encourage them to self-correct? How are you going to create change in that human, in that individual? Because really something always gets in the way. We mean to coach, but something always gets in the way. The enemy of the story is something called the forgetting curve. So what this is showing us is all human beings, our brains are wired in such a way that just like a computer where we have short-term memory and we have long-term memory. And if you teach someone something new, every day that goes by that after they learn that isn't reinforced, they will forget it. The mechanism by which this forgetting process happens is actually sleep, interestingly enough. So it's repetition and sleep are the key ingredients. While you're sleeping, your brain is deciding if it's going to purge the information and dump it, just like the RAM in your computer, or if it's going to write it to the long-term memory, just like the hard drive. And I think this is kind of comical because a lot of sales kickoff meetings, what do? We pay some expensive trainer or speaker to come in, teach you all these new things. And then usually there's an open bar until about 2 a.m. and no one gets a good night's sleep. It's the perfect recipe for the forgetting curve. Because if you think about the neuroscience of mastery, you create initial understanding, you grow new neural connections, and then you achieve mastery. So you're literally encouraging the rewiring of the brains of your reps to create consistency, to do those things they need to do on their calls in a consistent manner over and over again. So what we're going to talk about today, there are several objectives to this program when we do it in the real world. We're going to talk about defining what good looks like and coaching the calls the right way. But usually we also talk about prerequisites and alignment on goals and accountability methods, those sorts of things. But for today, we're going to just talk about define what good looks like and coach calls the right way. The thing you got to start and ask yourself are, what are the easiest behavior changes that have the greatest impact on revenue? And this is very, very important because, one of the things our clients will do is they run a call of the month contest. Sometimes the client sales rep, the way call of the month contest works, the sales rep will share their best call from the previous month with their manager. The manager picks the best call from their team, sends it up to the VP, the second level leader, who picks the winner and runners up, play the calls in front of the company. It's a great way to encourage consistency. But one of the things that we see with that is sometimes the sales reps send a sales call where the buyer basically just buys on their own. They do their own discovery, if you will. They kind of, just freely admit all of their challenges and pain points, and they talk themselves into a purchase. And they say, wow, this is a great sales call. And say, well, wait a minute. They bought, so that's good. And there's nothing wrong with that sales call, but would that be the thing that we would want to aspire towards if it was a challenging situation? And the answer is probably no. There have to be behaviors that the rep exhibits consistently, like asking about challenges, frustrations, pain points, understanding the impact. Maybe you use Challenger, corporate executive board, teach, tailor, take control. But the rep has to exhibit certain behaviors and have a certain skill set for the more difficult calls. So I'm more interested in how do the reps handle not the real easy calls where someone buys, but the tougher calls. There's a great framework here from a guy named Jim Keenan. He goes simply by Keenan, fantastic sales thought leader. He talks about the observe, describe, prescribe model. And it comes from, interestingly enough, skiing. He's a professional ski instructor. So you observe the person skiing, you describe what you see, and then you prescribe a way forward. And the best way to prescribe a way forward is with a question. So observe. So one of the things that we see sales rep do is they classically will ask basic questions about the situation of the company, but then they usually don't dig enough into the problem. So the way you would describe that, you say, hey, Keenan, on that call, you asked a bunch of situation questions, you got good information there, and from that point forward, you pitched the product or service. Now, the prescription would be, what could you do differently between asking the situation questions and pitching the product or service? And of course, the answer is, I should uncover challenges and pain points and frustrations, or what they're trying to achieve, what their goals might be, what are their priorities, so that when I talk about the product or service, I align. So that's an example of how do we coach? We use observe, describe, prescribe. Do not judge, just simply tell the person what they're doing. Lesson from ski instructing. So in the workshop, we do exercises where people listen to calls and use this. And it's tough. This is hard because the tendency in coaching is to just tell the person what they did wrong. I mean, that's what we all do. But instead, it's tough to suspend judgment and simply describe what you observe and then follow with the prescription in the form of the question. How could you think about this differently? What question could you ask here that you did not ask in this case? We want to try to get everyone calibrated on what good sounds like. Let's go back to that forgetting curve. Let's start thinking about that forgetting curve, because that is the enemy of this story. And changing adult behavior requires specific know-how. Beating the forgetting curve requires specific know-how. These are some lessons I've learned over the years from various sales thought leaders, and in some cases, neuroscientists like Bruce Lewald on the West Coast. So human behavior change. If you think about it, all of our reps, when they first start with us, are in a state of unconscious incompetence. They either don't know why they're bad, or they don't know what they don't know. Most of the cases, they don't know why they're bad. And then you move up to a state of conscious incompetence where you're aware or conscious of why you're bad, which is good. The first step to becoming really good at something is to be aware of why you're not good at it. So for example, I'm a pretty good skier according to most people who are average or non-skiers. They look at me and say, wow, you're a good skier. But I've gotten to a point where I recognize very well why I'm not a good skier when I ski with a guy like Keenan. He's just a grade, quite a few levels above where I am. But at least I'm at a point of conscious incompetence. I know why I'm not good. And actually, when he did the observe, describe, prescribe model when we were skiing together, it was like, wow, it was really kind of shined a light that I didn't realize I was doing certain things. And he made me consciously incompetent, even though I'm decent. I think we should all do that in our sales game. Then finally, you go to conscious competence. That means the person knows why they're good. This is nirvana. This is what we want. This is the holy grail. If we can get to a point where everyone knows why they're good and they're consistent, wouldn't all of our problems go away as sales leaders? The dangerous one is the unconscious competence. Those are the people who are good, but they don't know why. So when they're really good and they have no idea why and they hit their numbers, because the problem with that is you can't scale them. You try to have people shadow them. Just do what Bobby over there does. He's really good. Do what Janet does. She's our top rep. But what they do is not repeatable. It's not replicable, and it's not scalable. That's dangerous. So this process is all founded on the idea of there's two types of coaching. One is synchronous, and the other is asynchronous. So to change human behavior, you really want to become a master at leveraging synchronous coaching as well as asynchronous. Synchronous means we are in the same place at the same time and space, right? Physics. Asynchronous, we are in different places at different times, asynchronously. Asynchronous coaching can play a great role because it's fast, it's simple, it's easy. Leaders who are busy can do things like coach calls on their mobile phone when they're at the gym, walking the dog, or commuting. Mark Roberge, famous sales leader at HubSpot, he was famous for having put a laptop on his driver's or his passenger's seat in his car and listened to call recordings on the way in and out of work to HubSpot with about an hour commute in Boston. You can now do that on a mobile app. You can never have done that before. So you start by having the rep self-assess, then you focus on one or two topics, you role play and praise, track rep progress over time, and repeat. And you have to do this in an environment where it's positive and productive. So important. If you create any sort of a negative or toxic or caustic culture around your call review and call coaching, it will fail because people will not take those lessons. Why? What happens when you lead with criticism? And according to the brain science, when you lead with criticism, you get a little shot of a hormone called cortisol in your brain. Cortisol is a stress hormone. When cortisol is flowing in your brain, it's like the opposite of the leadership hormone. It causes you to want to run away or fight. It's the fight or flight thing. So when you play a call recording, like maybe even in a group setting, and then all of a sudden people start pigpiling on all the things the person did wrong, that rep will learn nothing. They will not change their behavior because they get that shot of cortisol, and they're either going to what? Number one, they're going to defend themselves, or number two, they're going to shut down. They probably won't physically run away, although I've seen that, but more likely they will just shut down and not pay attention, and they're not going to learn. You have to be open if you want to learn. So getting the rep to self-assess and comment on their own call to pinpoint areas of improvement according to a model of what good looks like. The scorecard, the objective criteria for evaluating a good call, that's an important part of the process. Probably the most important, because a lot of times, so Keenan and I actually disagree a little on this one. A lot of times the reps will not figure out what they need, in which case you as a coach can come in. But I find more often than not the reps, if they have an understanding for what good looks like, if they have a target to aim for on their different call types, and they have scorecards, does the rep blank, 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 and they go, well, no, I really didn't do that. I did not exhibit that behavior. They know. They can figure it out themselves. Great quote from one of our clients, Kim Harrington. Hey, man, you can't argue with your own ears. Love that. Former Marine, love you, Kim. Reps frequently self-identify what they need to change. They can figure it out, and they know. So let's move on. What happens when you coach the rep on 5 different things? On 5 different things. And the answer is they don't change anything. There's no way that the brain can manage that much capacity. Just like your computer, if depending on how much RAM you have, can only handle so many things to do at the same time. The reason why when artificial intelligence is processed in the cloud, it is very computer processing intensive. You have to keep adding CPU power to make it work. All right. So instead, we got to work with the limitations of the human brain. We're unfortunately not like computers. We can't just add more capacity. So what we have to do is focus on 1 or 2 topics. Focus on 1 or 2 topics using that observe, describe, prescribe model that works incredibly well. We coach too much. Focus one thing at a time. There's no reason for us to coach on 2, 3, 4, 5 things. 1, maybe 2, we can get away with. Get the person to create habits on that behavior that they changed, then move to the next thing, then move to the next thing. That's how you create mastery and excellence over time. Next step, role play and praise. So the positive reinforcement part of this has a big impact. It really can increase dopamine levels, reduce those cortisol levels, the stress hormones we talked about before. We want to get the person in a mindset where they are open to learning and changing their behavior. Praise is free, specific, less frequent, public, delivered by a senior leader. Another note here on role play. What I've seen is it's really funny, having worked with hundreds of companies and over the years, over 200 companies, I've seen that a lot of times in inside sales, actually most of the time when people role play, they look at each other. So if you're role playing in a classroom setting or in some sort of a huddle setting, they will look at each other. So do the role play the right way. Get on your dialer and call each other. And then you also have your recording, preferably in something like an Exec Vision. So that way you can go and review it later on. That's the best way to go about doing it. Or if you don't have a dialing capability, you can just go in other rooms and call each other on your cell phones, or you could also just put your chairs back to back. But either way, we have to cut off nonverbal communication. Usually the first role play, the rep gets it wrong again. Second role play, they get a little better. And the third role play, they stick the landing. So you probably want to role play it 3 times. And then you say, go out there, rep, and get me an example of you doing this in the wild. So go bring me a real example of you going out there in the wild and exhibiting this behavior, this skill in the real world. And that's this example here from Javi. And in this one, it was funny. The prospect actually said, I'll take the meeting because I like you. And that's great. That's if that's the reason why, that's a wonderful thing. He created an emotional connection. We want to celebrate that. A great way to celebrate that is to put it on a comment on his call, and other people learn from that in the future. Then trap rec progress over time. Here's a great one from Kevin Dorsey. Have the rep score their own call, share it with a peer who scores it, then a manager scores it. the social proof of the peer and the manager scoring the call the same is very powerful. So a call review sheet, a call coaching scorecard should have 5 to 10 elements. Try to keep it under 10. I can live with 12, no more than 12. And you should always have, does the rep blank? And the thing that follows the blank is the behavior that we're looking for. Does the rep close the call with concrete next steps? That is a yes or a no. And then you can score it on 1 to 5. And then we repeat. The thing is, this, if you don't have software for it, is very, very time intensive. It can take a long time to do this process, and you can take that down significantly if you have the right tools to do it. What if someone rejects coaching? So now we've talked about how to coach. What if someone rejects coaching? Going back to Keenan, some of the things that he talks about, degrees of freedom. So degrees of freedom, you originally when reps start, when reps are hitting their numbers, you give them lots of freedom. But if they don't hit their numbers, they live in a smaller and smaller box until finally they're on a performance improvement plan. Another thing you can think about is the skill versus will matrix. So desire, the will, and the desire could be to improve, to change, to grow, to develop, to hit numbers. The ability, the skill. How skillful are they now? And if you map out your reps on these, you'll be surprised. What happens is you spend way too much time in many cases with people that are low performers and maybe fall more into that bucket where they're probably not going to make it. Low desire, low ability, or some combination thereof. Research from the Corporate Executive Board says you should focus on the middle 60% of performers. We spend too much time on our low performers and too much time on our high. So this dictates how we think about coaching. You should not coach everyone the same way. Coaching is a privilege. It's not a right. It's not a right. And if you're wasting your time with your low performers, think about how do you get the biggest impact for your coaching calorie. So I want to burn the fewest number of coaching calories and get the biggest impact on the business. Stop wasting your time for people who are non-coachable. Focus your time on your beat performers, preferably in small groups where you can leverage your time. That makes a huge, huge difference. So in this workshop, one of the things we do is have everyone map their team on the skill versus will matrix to figure out who you should coach more, who you should coach less, or who you should coach differently. And you know what happens if a rep rejects coaching? There's a really handy rubric for thinking through why this person might be rejecting coaching and what we can do to change it. How do we leverage a rep who has achieved mastery? The answer is get your A's to coach your C's. If you're not going to work with your low performers, somebody should ask the top performer if they want to. If they don't want to, they don't have to. But if they want to, and eventually, especially for a promotion path, if they want to be in management, that's a great thing. They don't have to want to be in management. Maybe they just want to help. And that's fine too. So how can we leverage those people to do it? If you think about these coaching activities, most companies are doing these things in an analog 1.0. I always hear people say things like, you know, the 1970s called and they said they want their headset splitter back. And the problem that we're solving for at Exec Vision is the big pile of call recordings. So many companies record their calls and then just do nothing with them because it's so hard to try to pull a recording ad hoc and try to find a coachable moment. And then once you do, there's no way to comment on the call. There's no way to score the call. There's no way to share the call. There's no way to get a library of the best calls going. You certainly can't identify keywords or topics within the calls to jump right to the part of the call that's relevant and get to the things that matter. So there are much, much smarter ways of doing all these things now enabled by new technologies. Who motivates your reps? The answer is actually not you, it's your reps. Ultimately, your reps are the only people who will motivate themselves to change. If a rep does not want to change, they're not going to change. It's pretty straightforward. So what we can do as leaders is we can create an environment that where they have, they feel comfortable to fail, they feel comfortable to try new things, and they feel comfortable to change. If we can create that environment and they don't change, then we might have a different decision to make. Dan Pink's book Drive talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and how important it is to get people involved in their own development. So flip the coaching paradigm on its head. Right now, the coaching paradigm is managers, and you have 10 reps. That's crazy. If you spend an hour per rep per week, which we know is the best practice according to the Corporate Executive Board, now Gartner, hour per rep per week, that's 10 hours of your week for coaching, probably unrealistic. So get the reps involved in their own development. You can dramatically collapse that time, and you can also do those things like small group coaching session or departmental wide call of the month reviews 12-month contests. And that way you can maintain autonomy, mastery, and purpose while also maintaining your sanity and making it so you have the time to do it and you don't spend too much time burning coaching calories and not creating any sort of business impact. That's a waste. That's a waste. Great lesson from Joe Madden, head coach of the Chicago Cubs. He got them a World Series after many, 100-something years. And he talks about the 5 stages of a ball player development. I'm happy to be here. I want to stay here. I belong here. I want to make as much money as possible, and I want to win. Finally, I want to win. And that same process of the stages of a baseball player really apply to a sales rep as well. Because at first they're onboarding, then they kind of hit that steep learning curve where they want to stick around, and then they hit that first plateau and they say, hey, I belong, I can make numbers. That usually kind of goes up a couple times. There's a plateau, they go up again, they go plateau, learning curve, plateau, learning curve. Finally it hits the, I just want to make as much money as possible and do great. And then finally, I love this company, I love this team, I love this organization. I want not just to win myself, I want the team to win around me. And the way that you would leverage coaching is very different depending on those people. So for example, if you have someone who wants to make as much money as possible and they don't want any coaching or feedback and they're hitting their numbers and frankly, they don't need it. At that point, leverage their call examples as a knowledge base for other people to learn from. Create a library of the best calls from their calls and celebrate their success so that other people want to achieve that point. Down the road, they might become humble enough that they realize, wait a minute, I'm at 201, but I want to go to 301. Hey, coach, help me out. And that's how I want to win. You see some of the, the baseball players who've been in the league or any athlete for a long time, and they usually hit that point where they're really at the top of their game, but they haven't gotten a ring. And then they will take any feedback. They will do anything it takes to get a ring. And then it hits that next stage of the player development. Pretty cool stuff. How can you hold people accountable without observable moments? The answer is you can't. How can you possibly coach with a blindfold on? That seems insane. But the reality is most of us do that. Or we use a headset splitter, or we have a big pile of barely usable call recordings, and maybe we do a couple ad hoc, but it certainly is not the foundation for a positive, productive coaching culture. Great book, highly recommend it. Coaching Through Asking Questions, The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier. 7 just essential questions that every manager should be asking on every one-on-one and every interaction they have. And they're really questions for life too. So I highly recommend this book, The Coaching Habit. Check it out. Kevin Dorsey, he says, if you aren't willing to listen to your own calls, why would your buyers want to listen to your calls? I love, love, love that quote. And that's the power of listening. So that's it. Exec Vision, what we do, we're software that makes it just so easy to coach, ridiculously easy, and share examples, build the library of the top calls, get to coachable moments, and make it fun, make it part of the culture. Sales teams use us for onboarding, training, development, continuous improvement. We're the only application we know of where you can actually concretely track manager coaching. Are your managers coaching is a big question I hear from sales leaders all the time. We can answer that question. If you're interested in getting set up for a trial, we're happy to do that. And my cell phone number is 202-302-3193. You can also reach me, steve@execvision.io, or you can go to our website. Lots of resources there, including Call Camp. Every month we break down real sales calls for what works and what doesn't. So check out Call Camp. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening. Take care.